So we're right in the middle of what's being called the Green Revolution, which is the systematic nationwide decriminalization and even legalization of medicinal as well as recreational use of marijuana, of cannabis. And this is really a radical upheaval of what was historically a very, very huge illicit drug trade that involved multiple countries and thousands of people and literally billions of dollars for a simple plant. Kind of ridiculous, the idea to try to make something like this illegal, something you could grow in your backyard, but it was done and continues to be done in some jurisdictions. And so it's a pretty interesting time. Billions of dollars are now coming to the mainstream. This is now a taxable good, which is creating huge tax revenues in states like Colorado and Washington State and all the other places where it's become legalized. And then the question is, what does this really mean? I'm not a marijuana user. I'm not a huge advocate of marijuana culture. It just doesn't appeal to me at this phase of my life. But what I think is pretty interesting is when you have this plant, which has been used for thousands of years and has some very interesting elements like CBD, which stands for cannabidiol, which is one of dozens of cannabinoids, these compounds that are inside of this plant that has some really interesting properties. First of all, CBD, it's important to remember as we get into this discussion, is non-psychoactive, which means you can take it and you don't get paranoid, you don't get the munchies, you don't want to watch South Park episodes until 2 a.m. That's not the end result, but it's proven to be really effective for pain, anxiety, and sleep. Those are probably the three main things. You'll find all kinds of crazy stuff online about it curing cancer and all these kinds of things. I don't think there's really clinical data to back that up, but pain, anxiety, and sleep constitute a huge percentage of prescription medications. Needless to say, opioids, for example, opioid abuse is on the rise, and potentially CBD, cannabidiol, and maybe CBD plus some THC for certain people could be a much healthier alternative. I'm in no way a cannabis activist or anything like that, but I'm all for decriminalization of drugs. I can't see any good that's come from that. There's probably hundreds of thousands of people in jail right now for marijuana possession, which just seems crazy. Entire lives ruined for a plant, which is definitely less dangerous and harmful than a bottle of vodka or something like that. On this week's podcast, we'll be chatting about CBD specifically, and I just want to emphasize this is non-psychoactive, meaning it's not going to get you high. And I say this because I know most of you are not interested in getting totally baked on a Tuesday night, and so I'd like you to think about CBD. The market unfortunately has been flooded with network marketing and all kinds of weird pyramid schemes and things, and it's really difficult to figure out what CBD is good and what CBD is bad, and hopefully we'll shed some light on some products and some ways to think about this, especially just making sure that you get an effective dose. If you're new here, it's the Lucas Rockwood Show. I'm a yoga teacher, a trainer. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm the father of 3 kids. But first and foremost, I'm a student. I like to learn stuff, so I go out into the world and I meet medical doctors like today's guest, yoga teachers, meditation teachers, authors, experts, and I try to bring their best thinking to you here on the show, so hopefully we get some ideas about how to live a more fulfilled life. If you like the show, I recently canceled advertising because I found it kind of boring. And so instead, you can sponsor the show. Here's how you do it. You just share the show on social. Tag me. It's at Lucas Rockwood. If you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on, that would be very helpful. Last but not least, if you have a question for the show, send me a direct message on Instagram. I'm at Lucas Rockwood. I answer all of those messages myself. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy. So welcome, everybody. We're doing a different version of the podcast today, and the name of our podcast is Cannabis for Pain and Sleep. And I'm joined here with Mary Clifton, who is right here on Instagram if you're joining us here. And Dr. Clifton is a board-certified, licensed internal medical doctor. She's an expert in CBD and cannabis, which is what we'll be chatting about today. Her website is cbdandcannabisinfo.com. Lots of great resources there. She's the author of a couple books. One is called The Grass is Greener, and the other is called Get Wasted, and she has a bunch of companion cookbooks, and she speaks all over the place, and we're happy to have her here. Again, the website is cannabisinfo.com. Welcome, Mary.
Great to be here. Great to connect with you.
I was wondering if we could start off with some definitions. I've never been able to tell, or I don't know if there's a difference between CBD from hemp or CBD from cannabis, and I'll tell you sort of my understanding of what hemp versus cannabis is. I think of like Canadian hemp made for like us yoga people wear hemp clothing, and then I think of cannabis as like when I'm in Holland, they have this crazy sticky bud. Is there a differentiation to be made between the CBD derived from hemp and that from cannabis?
Not really. I mean, I think that hemp, it differentiates from cannabis in most people's minds, or at least in the industry, as hemp being cannabis sativa and cannabis indica plants that primarily concentrate CBD or don't really concentrate particular cannabinoids and work really to be very fibery for the development of clothing or ropes or things like that. So hemp is also protected under the Farm Bills here in the United States. So it has a different position as far as its ability to be grown and the restrictions around its growth. And then cannabis is also cannabis sativa or cannabis indica, but generally those are the ones that grow, and concentrate THC, the cannabinoid that gets you high. Because remember, CBD can't get you high. It doesn't have a intoxication effect. So having the THC concentrate puts it more in the cannabis or marijuana space, whereas the hemp space is more for CBD or for textiles.
Sure. So I first got interested in CBD, I guess it was 10 years ago, I guess it was, and I was living here in Spain. And so here in Spain, it was legal to get CBD coming from Holland. And so the first CBD oils and things I used came from Holland, and they definitely had THC in them. Definitely. and it was some of them less, some of them more, but it wasn't something that I could just take without thinking about it. I had a couple of experiences where, up in the middle of the night, paranoid and this kind of thing. And I think this is what a lot of people worry about. And obviously it's very, very different when you're buying things in the Netherlands, where things are largely unregulated, and if you're buying something in North America. But for people purchasing things, how should they think about it? Because a lot, my family's in Colorado, and there's a lot of people living in states where THC/CBD strains are, high CBD strains are legal and these kinds of things. For somebody who's like not a cannabis user and is freaked out, and in some cases appropriately freaked out, you can have a really bad night on. How can they think about this?
If you're making a CBD selection, CBD is legal in all 50 states. It's available everywhere, and you can use it in safely in all 50 states. The only time people get any prosecution or any legal issue with it is if you try to give it to somebody who's under 21. Then that's going to raise some flags. So if you're using it on a child, or if you in settings like autism or seizure, you just need to make sure you've got all of the right experts around you to keep you safe and protected in that setting. But but CBD that is sold has to be less than 0.3% THC, so it can't be intoxicating. I mean, there may have been some early products that leaned heavily towards CBD and weren't possibly properly following the rules, but the CBD is almost always tested. Every single batch has to be tested, and companies have to throw it out if the THC concentration is too high. And then for a lot of situations when I'm taking care of people medically, starting out with those CBD products do very well for getting a lot of people under control. And then you can add a little bit of THC or a lot of THC depending on what you need to do. But most of the time when you're making a CBD selection nowadays, if you read the label carefully, you shouldn't get into a position where you're getting THC. But you're right, there are a lot of people that can have sort of a paranoid side effect, or a side effect where they get too much energy from using the THC addition, or they get too sedated. So that's where it's really helpful to have somebody provide a little bit of guidance and support while you're making selections within cannabis, when you're using it medicinally or recreationally.
What's happened to me a couple of times is I've gone to dispensaries. We have sort of quasi-dispensaries here in Spain also. And I ask for, CBD, and they say, oh, we have a high CBD strain. And it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe it's higher in CBD, but this is really still a very, very psychoactive strain. And so this is, I guess, why I'm bringing it up, because many, many people live in decriminalized or legalized states. And when they go asking for CBD, sometimes they just get high CBD strains, which is still I mean, that could still take you for a really unpleasant evening if you ingest, somebody accidentally ingests half a gram of high CBD strain or something like that.
People do really well with a high CBD strain. I mean, in a lot of cases, in almost all cases, that's where I start and give people a chance to get the benefit of the CBD. And then, but sometimes in cases where you're dealing with like nausea or loss of appetite, cancer, you need to really get the higher CBD concentrations to get that treated, or lots of, chronic severe pain syndromes. But in a lot of cases, a little goes a long way as far as the THC. But choosing the pure CBD, if you have any concerns about THC, you can just stay away from the fuller broad spectrum and go with the CBD isolate products. And there's a ton of those that have that go through another level of distillation. And any THC that was contained in the product is removed.
And right now, for the past 5 years, CBD products have just been exploding. Everything from, CBD smart drinks, smoothies, face creams, everything. Is there a quality control issue? Are some of these ineffective? I know, like in the supplement industry, if you were to buy fish oil or something like that, there's a wide range. Some of that stuff is absolute garbage, and some of it's medicinal.
You're going to get a bottle of CBD that has, like, it'll say 300 milligrams of CBD, which seems like a lot, except for if you put it into a great big bottle, you're talking about maybe 10 milligrams per milliliter. So you might have to take 3 or 4 milliliters, 5 or 6 milliliters in a lot of cases before you're getting a result. 5 or 6 dropperfuls is not something people are going to do. They're going to do a couple of drops, see how it works, maybe go up to a half of a dropperful, maybe to a full dropperful a week later. So, I mean, this, when you really have to make sure that when you're selecting a product that you have a product that has enough CBD in it to have an effect. Because I do talk to people who say, this didn't work on me and it didn't work on the dog either. And then I'll ask them, well, what did you do with it? And they gave themselves, a couple of drops and then they called it a day. And so, but they're, a lot of times I think that's almost like a prohibition concept talking, because they're not willing to increase that titration very quickly. They're not really willing to move through a process with it. So you have to be sort of ready to think about this in a little bit higher administration amounts and be ready to start, tooling it up.
And so let's assume people are purchasing liquid CBD oil. I'm assuming it's in a carrier oil. And what is the percentage that they should think about? Because I think, especially when I first started consuming it, I used to get syringes, like a gel and syringe, and it's just like I just had no idea what the dosage was, and I didn't know what was strong concentration, what wasn't. It was kind of all over the place.
I think in a lot of cases, people start a little too low and they stop before they've given themselves adequate time to get enough to see if it's going to work. So I think starting at a administrative amount of around 20 milligrams and then going up, a lot of my patients settle out between 60 and 100 milligrams a day when they're managing anxiety, insomnia, pain. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of those settings where you can get quite a bit done, at that level. So I usually recommend that people go with a product that has at least 2,000 milligrams in the little dropper bottle. Okay. And sometimes even as much as 3,000 to start, because then that way a couple of drops has the potential to make a difference, And then as you're titrating your administrative amount, you're not going to have to take dropperful after dropperful. So those weaker amounts are, sometimes I think a little off-putting for people getting started and having a great result, because who wants to have a mouthful of oil? And so a little bit is okay, but I don't want anybody consuming a bunch of it. So.
So I'm guessing like $1 to $3 per day is what people are thinking about if they're dosing, right? In terms of like actual out-of-pocket expense. So similar to like a fish oil, like a high-quality fish oil, same kind of price range in terms of.
I think that's a reasonable amount off the shelf. If you're in a wholesale relationship, then you can probably cut that near half. Yeah.
And the other challenge with anything, whether it's fish oil or whether it's CBD or whether it's deep breathing or whatever, people fall into hyperbole really quickly. And so, the medicine cures everything from, PTSD to this and that. It's like Maybe, but from an actual, from a medical perspective, from a clinical efficacy perspective, what are just like, I can throw this at the wall and feel pretty comfortable it's going to stick? Of course, there's a bunch of outlying use cases, but what are the use cases where you're like, this is a pretty safe bet, this is going to at least move the needle in terms of benefits?
Well, I mean, it depends on if you're a lumper or a splitter in medicine, I mean, a lot of what is happening
I don't know that phrase. Tell me what that means.
Some people think that, every little condition has its own little batch of pathophysiology around it, and so they've got everything all split off. But I think personally, when you get to the bottom of anxiety, a lot of eating disorders, depression, a lot of insomnia, all of that is boiling down into dopamine and serotonin regulation and imbalance. So when you restore homeostasis to that system, you can manage a lot of different conditions. And that's true, because when we're managing these conditions in medicine, you use antidepressants across a whole spectrum of things that don't actually have to do with depression. We use antidepressants to manage chronic pain, and that's all serotonin and dopamine. So that's where it's so exciting to be able to share a product that balances and restores homeostasis at that neurotransmitter level. And the same thing is true when you're dealing with inflammation. The other pathway that CBD and other cannabinoids are so powerful is in restoring. I'm running out of juice. Restoring balance and homeostasis with inflammation. So if you can help to reduce the inflammatory response, I mean, very acutely in the situation we're dealing with right now, if you can decrease the amount of cytokine production and alleviate the cytokine storm, reduce tumor necrosis factor and interleukin, that reduces fever and body aches and mucus production. And, in one rat model, took a group of rats who were like laid out with the rat flu to another group of rats who were pre-treated with CBD, who were still eating and drinking and even solving a few simple mazes. They felt good enough to get up and have a little fun. And that's remarkable, that we can modify the immune response, the inflammation response, that way and that powerfully. So these are really valuable products, and really our bodies were designed for them. I mean, you have the endocannabinoid system, CB1 receptors all throughout your spinal cord and brain, CB2 receptors all throughout your immune system. 3, 4, and 5 receptors are located in some very limited places in the brain and probably aren't clinically relevant, because everything's getting stimulated by CBD or THC at various levels, or the other 80 known cannabinoids, So when you're when you're thinking about, how is this stuff affecting? It's you have this endocannabinoid system, you have these receptors, and you have a plant that grows outdoors literally like a weed. If we weren't in prohibition, it would be growing in my ditch. It's just that, right, well, I don't have a ditch, let's give you one on the 23rd floor here in Manhattan, but it'd be growing in somebody's ditch somewhere. And then and you'd be able to just use it. The animals that you would be consuming would be consuming it, and it'd be pollinating the air, so you'd always be getting that stabilization and that balance to your system, even if you weren't actively inhaling the product. The whole system is designed to work for you. So I don't see any reason why you shouldn't view this product as more of an adaptogen, like along with your mushrooms and your B complex and your omega-3 fats, all of the things that you're doing to restore that balance in your system.
And Mary, everybody I talk to who gets into CBD oil, they're always starting to add back in some THC, and the theory that I've heard is that, these cannabinoids work in synergy, and we're isolating one of them. We don't really know how that works, and modern cannabis is jacked up for THC. Like you said, it would be growing the ditch, but definitely it wouldn't be like Thai stick growing in the ditch. Like the stuff that they grow now, this is green crack. I mean, this stuff is so strong. It's so strong. It's been hybridized for THC, and so the stuff that would have been growing native in North America or whatever, it's nothing like the dank bud stuff they're selling. It's nothing like that.
I have a insurance connection within the cannabis community that said to me recently, I eat all of my food organic and all of my cannabis is inorganic because I want it under perfect growing conditions. I want the highest concentration of THC, and I want a very certain type that can't grow in the ditch. But he also, it will take like 1/2 of one puff. What he's trying to do is concentrate the THC so that he's not, necessarily getting that much higher, but he doesn't have to have that much exposure to the inhalation, which is really neat. If he can do one inhalation, so, but you're right. It does. If you were smoking back in the 70s when we were all kids, the 70s and the 80s, and you're thinking about getting back into it, you're absolutely right. Exercise caution because things are a little different nowadays.
Yeah. But are you of the same school? Are you of the same school of thought where there are benefits to integrating some THC into a CBD protocol if somebody tolerates it?
In a lot of cases, I will add a little THC for patients, and sometimes even when they're starting with a CBD consultation and we're talking about just adding CBD, I'll tell them I really wouldn't spend a lot of time on exclusively CBD given your circumstances. People who are having, end-stage cancer, pain or loss of appetite, that's not a CBD issue, although sometimes there's a decent response. But there are certain circumstances where I'd like to go straight to a higher concentration of THC to get those symptoms under control. But, a little bit of CBD followed by a lot of CBD so you can see how it's responding for you, and then add that shift to THC, because in a lot of cases, just getting the CBD at a high enough concentration is going to get you what you're looking for.
When I first started practicing yoga, the biggest challenge for me was flexibility. I couldn't sit cross-legged on the floor. I couldn't extend my arms above my head. Everything was just so uncomfortable because I was so stiff. And I was in my 20s, so my body was fully formed, obviously, as most of you are. And it puts you in a very different position. If you're an adult and you have major stiffness, major imbalance, the traditional yoga advice to just keep coming to class, for a lot of us, is just not enough. It's not that it won't work for mobility or flexibility, but because a typical yoga class includes strength and balance and breath work and so many other things, flexibility is number 4, number 5 on the list. It'll certainly help, but it can often just take way too long, or at least that was my assumption. If I just kept going on the path that I started back in my 20s, I figured it would take me 3, 4, maybe 5 years to be able to cross my legs and sit in a squat and lotus. And that was just too depressing. I couldn't really accept that. So I went on a mission and started researching. Didn't get a lot of love from my yoga teachers, meaning they didn't like this idea of flexibility training. So I went to other places, martial artists. I talked to gymnastics teachers, dance practitioners, and very quickly I learned it's not that complicated. Flexibility is not that complicated. The way to open your body is through long hold passive stretches. It's really uncomfortable. It's a process I call gravity yoga. I have been teaching this in workshop and class settings now since 2007, and just about a year and a half ago, I started certifying teachers in gravity yoga. Our teachers work with 2 different types of clients. One is they'll work privately to help somebody like a triathlete or a new mother, or even somebody who doesn't do any exercise at all, but they have an imbalance from working in the service industry or from carrying around a kid or whatever it is. And then the other way they work with people is within group classes and workshops. So 1-hour guided classes, in some cases 2-day workshops to help people open their hips, their hamstrings, their spine, and their shoulders. Those are often the tricky areas. And it's been super successful. It's really, really popular. It's one of these things that I thought I was the only one struggling with this, but no. It turns out many people every day when they go to put on their shoes are hyper aware of the fact that their hips and their hamstrings are problematically tight. And this isn't just about feeling flexible. It's also about taking care of your lower back and taking care of your joints. If you can't stand and move in a functional way, it can really cause problems. Imbalances in our body are one of the leading cause of back pain and knee problems. Even shoulder issues can derive directly from imbalances, and this is where gravity yoga comes in. I'm telling you this story now because we're about to start our last gravity yoga teacher training program of 2020. It's an amazing program. It's 12 days long. It's live with me, and we'll teach you everything you need to know to work one-on-one or in group settings Just so you know, most of our graduates now are working virtually via Zoom due to the coronavirus, and it's working just as well, if not better than before. To learn more about the course, go to gravityyogatraining.com, gravityyogatraining.com, and you can read stories from past students, watch a video from me, and see if it's the right thing for you. Course is starting soon. Hope you can join us.
The actual course itself I just want to give feedback and say it was superbly run. The use of modern technology and techniques, this feedback system, I was not expecting this. I was just expecting an email saying with a few bullet points. You guys are really set an example to every training college on how things should be done, and I can't commend you enough for that. It was money very well spent, and I'll be back for more courses, I'm sure. So once again, thank you very much. I'm very happy now. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
This week's nutritional tip comes in response to a listener question. Listener Sally S. on Instagram says, Lucas, I've noticed you've discontinued your nutritional supplements, specifically your Green Me Up Super Green Powder. Why did you do that? And do you have another brand that you could recommend? I find some stuff at Target, but I'm not sure if it's good. So we manufactured supplements for over 10 years, and I loved manufacturing supplements. I'm kind of a supplement nerd. But what happened is, over the course of the 10 years, supplements became really easy to find, which is great. You can find supplements, like you mentioned, Sally, at Target. You can find really pretty good supplements at Target. In fact, well, I've only been in Target a couple of times in the recent years, but last time I was there, I saw some pretty good supplements. And so that's why we stopped. There just wasn't really a need for it anymore. When I first started selling supplements in 2007, many of our listeners, many of our subscribers, they couldn't find stuff. And so it was a really fun thing to be able to do. And I like nutrition. I like putting things together. So yes, we had a formula called Green Me Up, which I also loved. It was a really great superfood green powder. In terms of, do I recommend them? Yeah, I definitely recommend them. You know, it's especially great when you're traveling to have little superfoods in your bag, just because a lot of times the food is kind of lifeless and boring and dull in terms of micronutrients, and so it can be a really helpful thing to carry. For those of you who are wondering what we're talking about, usually these green powders contain things like chlorella and spirulina and barley grass juice extract and other extremely, extremely mineral dense microalgae. Usually they're microalgae. These super green powders that look really, really dark green, almost purplish, that's usually what they contain. The gating factor for this is always my caveat for supplements, is your belly. And so some of these things will just wreak havoc on your GI system. You just can't eat much of them, or you'll end up on the toilet all day. But in terms of brands and things like that, I hesitate to do brand recommendations, because I don't know, these companies come and go, and suddenly they're making something great and they switch manufacturers and it's not that great. But there are lots of great stuff to find. I usually send people to iHerb, like iPhone, iHerb.com, great site for buying supplements, really great prices, and they ship all over the world, literally all over the world. It's a good place to find stuff, but especially if you're traveling, I think it's a really great resource. If you're at home, you know, usually if you can have any kind of fresh greens, that's going to trump any of those powders. But if you don't have access, I am certainly a fan. Hope that helps. We have a listener question this week from Joseph. Joseph on Instagram says, Lucas, getting into gravity yoga for hip flexibility specifically. Thanks for that. My question is, I'm coming off of 10 years in an office. We've all switched to remote work now. And so I have time to exercise, but I'm not sure what to do. I have about 18 or 20 pounds to lose. Will flexibility training help? I get some variation of this question pretty regularly, Joseph, so I thought I'd answer this directly. And the answer is probably not. Of all the different things you could experiment with to help with weight loss, flexibility training is probably pretty low on the list. Now, it could help with stress, and reducing stress reduces weight loss, but that would be I feel like that would be pretty much of a stretch if I was to suggest that, you know, your nightly gravity yoga is going to help with weight loss. When you are thinking about weight loss, there are things that I think are often overlooked, and those are things like sleep and stress, mental and emotional stress moderation, lifestyle balance, meal timing, carb throttling, but none of which involve extreme exercise or extreme calorie counting, which is generally thought of as the best practice. If you delve into the research around this, you'll find really quickly that extreme exercise and extreme dieting is almost always correlated with failure. It has a very, very low efficacy rate, and the most successful long-term weight loss programs involve moderate to light exercise, which would look and feel more like walking the dog. I just want to say that out loud so that, if you're not attracted to extreme exercise, if it's not something that you enjoy, and it's not something that's safe for your joints, depending on what age you are and things like this, you can be in great shape doing very, very moderate things, very simple things. I'd encourage you to go back and listen to some of the past shows. I have a show called Everything I Know About Weight Loss, where I share just some of the very, very simple, high leverage tips that I learned from the years I spent working in the weight loss market and things like this. We have a whole number of episodes where we chat about weight loss specifically. We'll link up in the show notes. I appreciate the question. Thanks for listening to The Lucas Rockwood Show. If you enjoy the podcast, I have 2 asks of you. Number 1, share the show on social media with your friends and tag me. My handle is @LucasRockwood. Number 2 is please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my mailing list, every week I send out information about the podcast, behind the scenes stuff, announcements of online classes and special events. I email about once a week. You can do that at yogabody.com/sign me up. And right now we have a free breathing worksheet on that page as well. It's yogabody.com/sign me up. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.